Joining us now to discuss former White House communications director under Trump and CNN political analyst Alyssa Farah-Griffin. Alyssa, thanks for joining us. Before we get into your interview with the committee, the transcript was released a few days ago. I want to get your reaction to what Sarah Murray just said. The committee telling the White House that they're worried that when Republicans take control of the House, White House personnel, these are career employees, not political appointees, presumably, witnesses whose identities were protected, could be revealed by House Republicans. Do you think that that's a legitimate fear?
It's a very legitimate fear, and it's astonishing, and it's something that any Republicans in Congress who, care about the credibility of oversight going forward need to oppose. This would be people like valets, Secret Service agents, people who worked within the resident of the White House that may have provided details that were important to the investigation of the committee, and they were simply just, complying whether voluntarily or with subpoenas. And as we've talked about many times, Jake, those of us who testified to the committee, we faced harassment, we faced threats, and it's opening these private citizens up to that, which they never signed up for.
You told the committee in your testimony this about former White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. You wrote, quote, "I am a Christian woman, so I will say this. Kayleigh is a liar and an opportunist. I wish her the best, but she's a smart woman. She's a Harvard law grad. This is not an idiot. She knew we lost the election, but she made a calculation that she wanted to have a certain life post-Trump that required staying in his good graces, and that was more important to her than telling the truth to the American public," unquote. Would you put a majority of your fellow White House staffers and officials in that category, or was Kayleigh McEnany a standout in that respect?
Listen, it was hard to read that back, to hear it, and to say it when I did, but it was the truth. Listen, silence is one thing. People who are in the White House not themselves speaking up against the election lies, that's shameful. It's not a good thing, but it is far worse to amplify the lies that led to January 6th and that have taken hold in this country in such a dangerous way. So I hold those who push those lies, especially who I believe knew better, in a different category than those who merely remain silent. And something I keep going back to and just kind of reflecting, 2 years after the fact of January 6th is, if doing the right thing was easy, more people would do it. But so many people sat on the sidelines and just decided someone else might speak out and do the right thing. Someone else might step in and stop this violence in real time. Kayleigh, others had massive platforms. They had massive public profiles that they could have used that day to hopefully try to stop the violence. But in the months and years that followed, to stop this just insidious lie that's consumed the Republican Party, that the 2020 election was stolen, when in fact it, of course, was not.
Yeah, no, I mean, she has a huge platform on a different channel, and she, as far as I can tell, doesn't use it to correct the record. Texts between Hope Hicks, another White House aide, and former Ivanka Trump Chief of Staff Julie Radford reveal how upset they were with Trump's actions on that day. This is private communication, not stuff that they've said publicly. Hicks tested Radford, quote, "We all look like domestic terrorists now," adding, quote, "This made us all unemployable." She also texted, quote, "Not being dramatic, but we're all effed. Alyssa," meaning you, "looks like a genius." Now, that text was referencing, my guess is, your resignation about a month before the insurrection. What went through your mind when you saw that?
Well, listen, when I stepped down in December, it was, of course, I was thinking about my future prospects, but it was first and foremost because I was uncomfortable tying my name and my integrity to this lie that was being spread by the campaign and by some White House officials. Listen, I think there was a lot of self-preservation going on by folks in the Trump orbit. It still is to this day, but I would also note, especially Hope, she knows President Trump very well. She knows that if you cross him, it comes with, again, threats, harassment, and being maligned. So I think there's also an intimidation factor that has contributed to more people not speaking out and telling the truth about what they know about him. And I just want to note what's been so masterful about the January 6th committee is they've gotten all these people in their own voices on camera, talking about how they really felt about him. And I thought it was very notable that Hope called it what it was, domestic terrorism. That's important. I'm glad that she said that.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, testified about unflattering opinion articles written about Trump by former flag officers, generals and admirals. In referring to one of those former officials, Milley says Trump and his aides asked Milley to, quote, bring him back on active duty, court-martial him, you know, make him walk the plank sort of thing, right? I advised them not to do that. That's just deranged. I mean, that is the behavior of a tyrant. Does it surprise you?
No, and I worked with Chairman Milley at the Department of Defense, and I'm grateful that he was constantly this roadblock against these terrible instincts by the former president. But it just goes to show Donald Trump does not even understand the U.S. military that he oversaw, which is right now the most diverse force that's ever been in history, ideologically, racially, religiously. This idea that, you know, somebody who's in the military shouldn't be able to criticize him is absurd. That's something you would expect to see in the Kremlin, not in the United States. And it's just, you know, another dot to remember in the long list of things that make him so unqualified to ever hold office again.
You told the committee that the CIA director at the time, Gina Haspel, had a, quote, suicide pact with the entire intelligence community if Trump actually fired her. You don't mean that literally, but you mean career-wise, that if he fired her, that others would resign. You say Trump tried to fire her, but he backed out almost immediately, and, quote, allegedly for about 14 minutes, Kash Patel was actually the CIA director. Now, there's no public record of that, but that is absolutely terrifying. Kash Patel was the acting CIA director for about 14 minutes?
Well, and I want to be clear, this was anecdotal, but I heard it from very senior officials who I trust that this took place. And because so many officials within the IC and the national security community knew what Donald Trump was capable of and how he just fundamentally didn't understand his role and their role, they had these pacts and these alliances in place to make sure that the incredible, important work that they do couldn't just be stopped on his political whims. So this, in the final days, it was a very, very scary time in the intel community as well as the Department of Defense. We obviously saw he installed a loyalist at DOD. He installed Kash actually ultimately at DOD. But even within the CIA, and it was someone like Gina Haspel that was able to stop that, and other officials within the NSA and DIA and other places, that my understanding has stopped it from happening, which could have been crippling to our intelligence gathering all over the world. Yeah,
Milley testified about a rescue operation that Kash and some others said, oh, yeah, we got approval from the other country for a flyover, and they hadn't. That could have been disastrous. Who knows what would have happened. There was a clear pattern in your interview with the committee about Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows. Here's one little bit. Quote, sometimes Meadows would be an ally and would help, like, stop certain things. But then other times he would either be just non-existent, injecting bleach, for example, like I've got this, and then it ended up going forward. I never saw evidence that he really pushed back on the president. You also told the committee you tried to get Trump to walk back when he said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, which is a tweet he sent a few days after George Floyd was killed by police and there were protests. He refused. Was there anyone that Trump actually listened to? Was there anyone that could actually say to him, Mr. President, this is a horrible idea. If you do this, you're damaging the country. If you're doing this, you're damaging national security. Do not do this. So anyone like that he listened to?
Honestly, in reviewing my testimony and when I gave it, not that comes to mind. There were people, I mentioned Robert O'Brien as someone who I found to give him sound counsel. Many folks at agencies did, but nobody could truly change his mind. And I mean, that was exemplified, obviously, on the events leading up to January 6th. I tried to, in my testimony, give as many concrete examples to sort of show what I meant. And in the injecting bleach story, which has become, infamous now, just goes to show that even the White House chief of staff couldn't stop a briefing like that from going forward and leading to this horrifying moment that will go down in history as one of the worst White House press briefings. But then, of course, much, much worse was the days leading up to January 6th, where we were told, oh, we won't let this person get in front of him. We're not going to let these lies get in front of Donald Trump. And yet they somehow still ended up in the Oval Office. So that's why I reserve some of my harshest, frankly, criticism for Mark Meadows.